Okay, so welcome everybody to today's presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. If you could just keep yourselves on mute as the presentation is going on, then feel free, you could unmute yourself, ask any questions that you might have. And if you feel more comfortable and want to use the chat, you can do that too, and I could watch out for those. And you know what, I probably should have asked you this in the beginning. I'm so sorry. How do I pronounce your name? My gosh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's a difficult one. It's very phonetic if you break it up. It's Gitanjali, but you can call me Gigi.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so a couple of and one other thing I just wanted to mention is before we get started is if you go to our Paro website, there is the nominations are open for our big event happening November 23rd. It's both in person and online, and you'll find out more information on there. So if you know, well, if you would like to be nominated yourself for some of the awards that we're giving out, there's a list on there and you could fill that out. And registration, I don't think it's open yet, but it should be, it is open. Yeah, sorry, it is open. So go ahead and register. There's an early bird pricing there too. So anyways, look forward to having everybody there. So I'm just going to pull up the bio here. And I'm going on the safe side, sorry, Gigi, and I'm going to say, introduce our business counselor with Paro, Gigi. She has one of those, Gigi has one of those kids whose parents encourage her to not to get a job, instead help develop an entrepreneur mindset. Since the age of 5, she has been experimenting with different business ideas. From seeing success at a young age to failing and making lots of mistakes, Gigi has a well-rounded approach and understanding to running a business. At Paro now for 8 months, Gigi is thrilled to be presenting today. So I just wanted to welcome you and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I appreciate it. Welcome, ladies. I'm so grateful that you're here. And like you had brought up, business expenses and budgeting is extremely important. Please feel free to ask questions along the way. I'd be very happy to answer. And if you have any personal stories you want to share as well, we'll be open to that. So we're going to be going through today what are business expenses, how do you project your expenses. We're going to have a little example of Meet Jane. She's opening up a toy store as an example. And what will your expenses be? So according to Revenue Canada, business expenses are certain costs that that are responsible or reasonable for a particular type of business and that are incurred for the purpose of earning income. Business expenses can be deducted for tax purposes. Personal living or other expenses not related to business cannot be deducted for tax purposes. So as we know, having a business as a sole proprietor or as a corporation, there's different things that you can deduct. And it's very important to research in your business what you can deduct. And just as a business owner from the past, you'll find certain things really help you cut down on how much taxes you're paying. So it's very important to know what you need to save receipts for, how to document that properly. I learned very earlier on, now we have POS systems and everything else, but before we had POS systems and they were very popular, I would just save all my receipts, and over time, within a few months, the amounts on them will fade away. So making sure that you have them documented properly in an Excel sheet, or you're using an app to take a picture of them right away is very important. Talking to your accountant ahead of time before you start a business to find out what business expenses are legible is also very important, because some might take you by surprise. As a part of your business plan, you'll be developing your projected cash flows, essentially what you think you're going to be making for the first 3 years of your small business and what the cost of your business will be for the first 3 years. And that's just sort of your budget, just to make sure that you can afford your business and you're not going to go bankrupt in trying to do so. When you're projecting your business expenses, you're also projecting your income. And that allows you to see what your profitability will be, create margins, and work with all of that. The information that it'll give you is a good idea about your financial viability. And your viability in business is extremely important, because that, that predicts your longevity. How long are you going to be in business? Is this going to be sustainable? Are you accounting for the bumps that are going to come along the way? And we can't foresee everything, but if we're able to kind of understand a very modest approach to what our income would be and the most our expenses could be, it gives us a realistic expectation of the difficulties or the good times are about to come. So how do you project your expenses? Brainstorming, of course, every possible expense that you'll incur in opening and running your business. As an example, it could be paper, ink, pens, file folders. It could be, you know, food if you're running a cafe, your machines, your equipment, your filters, all the little nitty-gritty things. It could be business cards, flyers, advertising, signage, internet access, phone lines, rent, utilities. Is there any other ones that anybody else would like to add to? What other little expenses can show up in a business? No. One expense that showed up for me, I used to run a general store, but I wanted to recreate what that used to be, which was local and community based. So I had about 50 women vendors in store. And an expense that I didn't think about was the fact that I was collecting tax on their behalf, but I wasn't charging them tax, or they weren't charging me on their invoice. So I was paying extra tax on their behalf, which was something that I didn't, you know, expect. Another little expense was repairs. I had projected when I was creating my business plan and my cash flows that I was going to have a small cafe inside, and the electrical work that I had done initially was going to be enough. I had spent $14,000 on electrical work. I wasn't planning to spend any more, but it cost me another $9,000 once I had brought in equipment and I had refrigeration. I didn't know there's different plugs, outlet plugs that required different electrical pulls. So I had to call in my electrician, get the plugs changed, add more voltage, and it was very expensive. It's an expensive lesson to learn, especially when it's not in your budget. So really going into detail and brainstorming all of the little details, talking to people that are in the industry or researching those things are very, very important. So after you have a list of expenses, you're going to categorize them, and that will help you in different things that you can claim in your taxes. Once you have an idea from your accountant or like a little list, you can also access it on Canada.ca business expenses that you can claim. You're going to categorize your list of expenses into that. So it can be advertising, equipment, office supplies, location improvements, things like that. We're going to meet Jane. She wants to open up a toy store. Jane is starting her business plan and she needs to get an idea of how much it'll cost her to start and run a small toy store. So let's help her out and brainstorm all the possible expenses she'll incur in opening her store. Do you ladies have any suggestions on what do you think she'll have to consider?
Yeah, I guess the location, is she going to have to pay rent, or does she pay a mortgage? Or
Yeah, that's a
and
good
then
one.
utilities?
Mhm. She'll have inventory, perhaps. Startup costs could be salaries for employees. How many hours will she be open? Is there going to be enough time and support to run her business? Other startup costs could be the advertising for sure. You know, marketing, signage, uploading a website is a big expense. Who's going to design it, create it, your marketing plan, all those little things. So now that we've kind of like, you know, got an idea of what her expenses will be, we'll start putting them into categories. So we have retail inventory, advertising, and utilities, and little things that would go onto that. So under advertising, your bank fees, you have your bookkeeping as well. These are different categories that you can have. Is there any that catch anybody by surprise? That's good. Everyone knows what drawings means as well. So drawings is your own personal salary, what you're taking from the business. And that's something that I think we often forget. Are we paying ourselves in the business, and are we not? And if we're not paying ourselves, how are we supporting ourselves in the business? And when is it okay to start taking a personal salary from the business as well? You might have different membership fees. This doesn't apply to every business, but sometimes you have to look into different things that you might be paying for. Some could be things that you're unaware of. I know when I used to have my financial practice, I had my license fees that I had to pay yearly. And one thing I didn't know was I had like continued education courses that I had to take, and there's fees associated with that. So little things that you might want to look into as you're doing your research and categorizing your expenses. There can be seminars and there could be trade shows as well. A lot of businesses that I know that I deal with clients, they attend a lot of trade shows or conferences. So taking that into consideration when it comes to seminars or travel, you want to look into your flights. Like, you know, say if you are flying to attend a trade show, with Pero, we often go for the greens and we go to WeBank Canada. There's travel expense with that. You have your hotel stay, you have your flight cost, your food, things that you're renting, maybe a car. So factoring all of that into your expenses is also very important. So now what type of expenses would be fixed, variable, and startup? Any idea on what fixed expenses are?
I would say fixed expenses are things like rent,
Mhm.
Utilities. It depends on if you have a staff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you would roll that in there. Yeah. Those are fixed, I would consider fixed expenses. I probably missed something, but
No, that's a good start. And what about variable? Unfortunately, it's not variable mortgage, which a lot of us are suffering with.
I'm glad you said that because I'm in the mortgage business, so
Yes.
variable expenses, variable mortgage. Variable, it I would say depends on the type of activities that you have going on. There's some things that you might be doing that are not you know, you may not need to do all the time, like through the business. It might be like maybe just for that 1 month. That's an additional expense to do something. Maybe start up work on maybe a project that will only last a few weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And startup?
Startup costs is, I would say, would be things like that you need to start your business with. Maybe you need a new laptop, you need office furniture, I think even like if you're renting a space, that's part of your startup, but that also becomes a fixed expense.
Yes.
What can I think of? Let's say furniture, desk, chair, laptop, printer, coffee, just kidding.
That's a fixed expense.
That's a fixed expense. Depends if you were in a position where you're delivering products, you might need a van for delivery, delivering purposes. If your products are something that is manufactured, you would need you know, products, whatever materials you need to make that product to start up. That's part of your startup costs.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else.
That's okay. Thank you so much. In the chat, we have professional development and seminars as well. And those are variable expenses for sure. And I want you to know that there's no like right or wrong answer with these because certain things move around. Like you had said, your rent can be a startup expense and then it becomes a fixed expense, right? So it's a bit of both. And with variable expenses, something like your utilities can also be variable because with gas, for example, you're not paying that every month. It changes based on usage or based on season, right? Another variable expense that can be a fixed expense and variable could be your salaries actually as well. You know, in summer season, for example, I live in a tourist town. My salaries were a lot higher for my staff compared to in winter. So even though salaries are fixed, the amount was variable. So there's no right or wrong answer, and things can move from category to category as well. And a startup expense, like I had mentioned, was my electrical work. And then it became a variable expense that kind of just showed up later on as well. So in terms of Jane, fixed expenses per definition are expenses or costs that don't change from period to period. They generally, if they do change, it's slightly. In small businesses, a fixed expense is one thing that doesn't change according to the amount of production or sales. So your rent, for example, would be generally a fixed cost because month to month, it's the same. Or your internet bill is the same, your phone bill is the same. It could be your bank fees. You know, if you have a bank account, your bank fees are the same. Your website, if you're paying for the year, that's the same. Insurance, things like that. A variable expense is a cost that changes according to the amount of production or level of sales or even weather conditions. So like I had said, salaries, it's seasonal changes, right? Trade shows can be seasonal. Sometimes we're attending farmers markets in the summer, so our income level is going high, but we don't have that expense in the winter because there isn't as many trade shows. So it could be product supplies, equipment, office supplies, your advertising costs, utilities such as heating. Those would be your variable expenses. Startup expenses is a cost that you'll need to incur when you are getting the doors of your business open, and it'll be what you need on your first day of business in order to make your sale. So it could be your POS system, like Sylvia had mentioned, your laptop, your furniture, your initial inventory. So when you're creating your cash flow and budget for your business, you want to brainstorm all the possible expenses that you incur in your first year. You'll want to put them into different categories. You'll want to start making phone calls and getting accurate quotes for your expenses. Very often what we see as business counselors is, especially in the cash flows for new startup businesses, is just an estimate of what certain expenses will be, but not a guesstimate. And the difference is that it's you're doing your research. You're getting as close as a quote as possible for the expenses. You're doing your market research, not just guessing, you know what, I think my gas is going to be $50 or my internet bill is going to be $50 because I pay that much for my phone. It's very different. You want to make sure it's as real as possible so your cash flows give you a real idea of what your business will look like and what your expenses will be in the first year. You'll start plugging them into your cash flow statements as well. This can be done in Excel or whatever platform you're using. And that's the main of understanding your business expenses. So I'd really like to get into details in terms of situations that can change and how you need a worst case scenario when it comes to your business expenses as well. So once you've done your cash flows, you have all of your numbers in, you're like, okay, I need $25,000 to start my business. That budget, if it's very tight, it can go both ways. You can end up spending a lot more or a lot less. A lot less is great, but figuring out what your emergency fund is and what you can handle is also very important when it comes to your business expenses. A real life situation for me, when I started my general store, I had created my business plan, I had my cash flows, and everything had made sense. I knew I had 6 months to get until our summer season. I live in Grand Bend. It's a very tourist town. We go from 7,000 people living here year round to about 60,000 people coming to visit in about 60 days from July and August. And that's a really big jump. So a lot of people make their money in those 2 short months. And I was relying on getting to the summer months to help that business grow. So I had my fixed expenses, which was my rent, you know, my startup costs, all those things. And the variable would just be in how much inventory I was purchasing in the summer months. But what I didn't take into consideration was surviving till that long. I was assuming that the business was going to start generating enough income to be able to pay for the rent and the basic things. I did not expect to pay out of my pocket for the first 6 months when it came to rent. only for the first 3 months. So when the business did not pick up the traction that it needed to survive, it was really difficult. And I didn't have backup financial funds. And that was a really expensive learning lesson. You know, it was very difficult to give up on something that I started with a passion and, you know, and I loved. And it was being realistic with myself on my worst case scenario as well. Can I accept more loss? Can I survive another month and hope to make it to summer and that's my golden ticket? Or do I need to be realistic and cut my losses and move on? And I realized that I can't just bank on imaginary numbers. Just because I live here, I know what the summer's like. I can't bank on imaginary numbers. If July comes around and I'm not making that income, I'm in debt more and more and more with money that I don't have. So I decided to cut my loss, and I knew what my worst case budget was. And I was there. And knowing that and being realistic is very important because we can be very attached to our business, especially when we're putting in a lot of money, especially when we're putting in a lot of time and effort, and especially if this is, you know, our dream coming to fruition. It's really hard to let those things go. And I cannot stress enough calling up and asking for quotes. You know, things change very, very fast. Especially if you're getting work done in your place of business, if it's a brick and mortar place, getting those quotes from builders and electricians and plumbers ahead of time where you have it in writing is very important. If they just come in and say, oh yes, it's going to cost about 7,000, and you know, when they're actually working on things and they go into details, the bill ends up being more always. I don't think it's ever come out less. So having a very realistic expectation, and in your own mind, budgeting for a little bit more is very important when it comes to expenses. Expenses budget higher, income budget lower. Expect to make less than what you think is a very modest income. In another case, I had a client who was starting a dance company, and what she was expecting to make an income sounded lovely on papers. It would be a dream come true to make your first $150,000 in your first year of business. She'd been working at this for about 2 years, and she had taken on a $60,000 loan and was looking to purchase another loan or get another loan to keep this business afloat. But taking that realistic, the reality versus what she had on cash flows, it just didn't make sense. She had been business and wasn't generating any income. And with a little bit more money, she was going to be able to generate $150,000. That connection wasn't there. She wasn't being realistic on what her income expectations were. It was just the potential of what she could make, not a realistic plan on how she could make that money. So when it comes to business expenses, I definitely encourage be as realistic and harsh on yourself as possible, because it prepares you for what's coming your way. And the best case scenario is you're going to do a lot better. The worst case scenario is you've prepared yourself mentally to be able to deal with those challenges. And having, you know, your first year figure it out the best you can is very important. Businesses go through a 5-year cycle. So they usually say if you've made it to the 5 years of business, you've seen you've seen how viable your business is, and you've seen a full business cycle, full financial cycle of highs, lows, and profit, breaking even. And in your first year, keeping afloat and knowing that, you know, you're probably not going to break even, and that's okay. It's figuring out managing your expenses. It's figuring out, you know, who your clientele is, your marketing, your market research, and working with that. It creates the viability of your business. Understanding that is very important. Understanding how you can make your business better the next year is very important. Costs that you can cut down on. A very dear friend of mine, she started a weed lounge way back before they were at every corner of every street, like Tim Hortons. She had the very first weed lounge that had an outdoor seating area, and it felt like it felt very European. It felt like a very beautiful vibe, and she had all these beautiful ideas, different themes that she was exploring with. And her plan in her business expenses was she had a good amount of budget to move around with or play with. She didn't take into consideration on how to cut down costs. She wanted to see what worked for her. And that was her strategy, and it worked for her. So she didn't care about cutting down on food costs, if something would be cheaper or not. She wanted to experiment with the recipes and see how successful they were. She wanted to experiment with the crowds that were passing through. She wanted to experiment with what theme nights worked and what didn't, kept record of it all. And her second year, she took her financials and her business expenses and saw where she could cut back and increase her profit margin. So the way you do it, there's no right or wrong. Generally, we encourage new business owners to be very mindful and to do it a certain way, but you can do it in many different ways to get the same result. The end result is to be very mindful of your business expenses and know how much you're making, how much you're spending, and what your profit margins are, to be on top of your finances, not under them. Any questions? Lori, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think that you've covered everything there. Nothing that I could think of. No, everything
Okay.
was good. Yeah.
I'd like to add, definitely jot down these emails. And if you ever wanted to reach out, there's so many people at Paro that can help you, especially with templates. I think personally in business, finding different templates on Google was very difficult because they would say they're free and then you have to enter your email and your credit card number or whatever. We do have great templates that you can use, built-in Excel sheets that will generate numbers. And using those resources is very important because it gives you a really good visual. I'm personally a visual learner. I need to learn in different ways, but having things in front of me and a live document that I can edit and change, it's not a one-time thing, is very important. Your expenses need to be printed and displayed in front of you. Every time you make a purchase, you need to have that accounted for. To be realistic with it. Staying on top of your finances is very important when it comes to starting your business. And as you're in business, it's not just the preparation to starting and opening your doors. It's a continuous process as you're in business as well, managing your expenses, really seeing what they're turning out to be. It's really easy to fall behind. I'm definitely somebody who's done that. I've left it, and I had both my children, I had them very close in age. I was managing more than one business, and I let my receipts collect and collect and collect and collect. And I didn't know what the financials looked like. I just knew what was in my bank account. And when I had to file my taxes at the end of the year, it wasn't very pretty. I had to pay over 20 grand in taxes for HST. And I did not know what to do. So I had to rake through all of those receipts. I had to go through, how much HST I had paid to reduce my taxes. And it taught me a lot about my financials. It taught me a lot about staying on top and finding a system that works for me. Maybe Excel sheets are not your system. I found apps work really good when I was on the go. Having a smartphone, you can literally do anything these days. And sometimes doing it the old-fashioned way. My mom still keeps a book log of everything she buys and, records all the numbers. I've seen other people just file away receipts into a cabinet. So figuring out what works for you is very important. And taking advantage of the resources around you is also very important. Get connected with a business coach. I used to spend a lot of money monthly talking to different coaches to help grow my business and better myself. And I wish I'd met Paro earlier, So working for Paro is a blessing, but there's so many other organizations and other resources that you have around you. Your local economic development committee in the area is there to support your business. Attending seminars, learning, and attending something like this shows that you're serious about your business and you're willing to put in the time and learn something new for your business as well. So continuously doing that is very important because it's not just necessary in the startup, it's necessary throughout. You're always learning something new. There's always new things coming out, new systems coming out. Simplifying your life is really important. I found that if I didn't have, me and Lori were just chatting about it earlier, if it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist, So if it's not in my Excel sheet when I'm managing my expenses, I could forget about it while I'm doing my taxes. My accountant can ask me 10,000 times, did you travel and you were in Ontario? You can get this rebate back. And I'll be like, nope, didn't happen. It's not my Excel sheet. And a week later, I'll be like, crap, I went here. But that time has passed. So being on top of things that cannot stress is very important. Figuring out your own system, taking advantage of the tools around you, and asking for help. Ask women how they do it. It's a very difficult conversation you'll find very often, talking about expenses, talking about finances, but encouraging that conversation is also very important. Yeah, I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are here to support you.
Thank you so much, Gigi. That was really great. We appreciate that. And thanks everybody for joining us. And no other questions, just to make sure. No. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Appreciate it. And oh, sorry.
I was just saying thank you. I'm going to drop
sorry.
an email in the chat box as well. If you ever wanted to reach out, please feel free to. I'm happy to have a conversation as well.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day.
No problem, Mary. We're glad that you made it.